See the attendees coming in. Welcome everybody. I'm going to wait a couple of minutes as people arrive. Anna, Ben, Daniel, Emily. Hi, Emily. Jasmine. Oh, it's good to see so many names. Mandisa, welcome. Me too. Monique, Omar, Robert. Welcome everybody. Samantha, Stefan. I was on one of these recently, and what they did was play elevator music during this arrival time, which I thought was a really good design for these few minutes that start at the beginning of a group session where everyone's arriving, and you're like, well, it shouldn't start before everyone gets here, but it's kind of awkward to sit and just look at each other. So let's just do that part. We'll be starting in a couple minutes. All right, I see the arrival is starting to slow down, and there's a bit of setup here anyways that I think that people can continue to arrive through. So I'd just like to start by welcoming everybody to this webinar. This is a webinar about the 4 CEOs that a company needs to scale. It's really a pleasure to be sharing this model and this content with you guys. It's something that we've found just really lands with our clients at Talentism, the executives and CEOs that we coach. That helps them make sense of kind of where they are on the journey in respect to themselves as they scale their companies, and to find and identify points of confusion, places where they might trip up and so on. The 4 CEOs that a company needs is really a reference to the frames of mind or the conceptualization that a CEO has to go through in order to continue to scale. This is why you will actually often see that over its lifetime of scaling, a company will go through different CEOs, and that it's a rare thing that a single CEO stays with a company for the duration of that growth phase. Why this matters to you is that to accomplish ambitious goals in the world, you are ultimately going to have to scale to accomplish bigger and more interesting and more complex goals. And if you want to be the person that's kind of at the helm or definitely involved in some way during that journey, then it's helpful. It behooves you to know kind of what that journey is going to look like. We, as I've said, we see blind spots around this trajectory with our clients all the time, and ways that really hurt them, that hurt their companies, that limit their ability to scale. And so when we're talking about what kind of content we wanted to share next in this public setting, we thought this would be just a really good one that would land with the types of people that we work with. Now, just a note here that this presentation is targeted at CEOs and executives, but this is a model that applies to anyone that is growing in their career. Basically, as you grow through your career and you begin taking on more complex and more interesting goals, you're going to have to go from the doer of the work to the delegator and decider of the work, to the designer of the organization that you work with and how that organization accomplishes the goal, to the decoder of the future. So this is really a trajectory no matter what your goal in your career is, whether you are an executive or not. And so I did want you to know that it applies to all of us. Any leader goes through these stages. So at this point, I think we have our attendees. I'm going to cut video a little bit just to say hello. Here it is. Hey, everybody. My name is Cesar Gonzalez, and I am an executive coach for Talentism. I'm also a facilitator and a former CEO, and I spent the early part of my career working in tech before really diving in deep with entrepreneurs and kind of their internal sense making and how they build companies. With me are Trevor Hunter, who is a partner at Talentism and our head of coaching, and also Sharon Billings, who is our lead trainer. They'll be here to support me, to observe, to catch this thing if I fall flat on my face, and also to answer some of the questions in the Q&A. Speaking of which, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a button for Q&A. As we're going through this, please go ahead and type your questions or your confusions into that box. If they're quick and easy to answer, Trevor and Sharon will attempt to answer them. And if they're not, if they require kind of a longer exploration, we're setting time aside at the end, 15 or 20 minutes to really get to a Q&A. So there will be time for that at the end. Making sure I have all this stuff here. Yeah, so that's kind of how this will go. And before we jump in, I just kind of really want to contextualize this around you. Why did you show up here today? What's important about this topic or this conversation to you? Why is scaling something that's on your mind that you would devote an hour of your day to today? Maybe you come with an excitement about learning the model. Maybe you come with a fear or a worry about where you might get stuck, about where you might not be seeing things. And so just giving you a minute here to think about that so you have that context as we go through this. And some other context that I invite you to think about is just think back over your last few weeks. Maybe even kind of switch the view here, go to your calendar and take a look and look at where you've been spending your time and your attention. Or have you been investing your time and your attention these past weeks and months? How much of that time is spent on just doing the work of building your company, the tasks and the meetings and the deliverables and the execution of it? Look back, think back over your weeks and how much of your time is spent in management, in clarifying to people what goals need to be accomplished, how they should be accomplished, in clarifying to them timelines and what good looks like. How much of your time, if you think back over your weeks, is really spent in delegating or deciding what the work is to be done and who's going to do it? Think back over your week and think about how much of your time has been spent in designing the organization. What roles are ultimately going to help you achieve your mission, your purpose. What kinds of structures are you going to need internally to really create the learnings that you need to continue to progress? What think about this designing of the org, this imagination piece of how things will work. And also think about how much of your time is spent thinking about the market, what's out there, what are the opportunities, what are the pitfalls, decoding the reality of the field that you work in, the market that you swim in, to your team, and doing it for yourself, but also communicating that to your team so that they are aligned about where you're headed. So that's a bit of what we'll be diving into today. Let me go ahead and bring back up the presentation. Here we go. And the way we'll go through that, what we're going to cover is we're going to start just by defining what confusion means at Talentism. You've heard me talk about that a couple of times, and so it's helpful to give you kind of our definition. We'll be talking about this path to scale. What is it, this way that we see it, and the 4 stages that a CEO goes through kind of as they scale their company, where they place their attention and how they show up. We'll be talking about 3 of the most common confusions. We've identified a whole handful of them, but there's 3 that really I want to talk about today that kind of will really tend to land with us, and they're patterns that we see across many of the CEOs and executives that we work with at Talentism. So one thing that I failed to mention is Talentism is a coaching and consulting practice, and our purpose is to systematically unleash human potential. And we believe the commercial sphere is a fantastic place to do this because people are really motivated to achieve goals towards bigger missions. And so that's really where we're diving in deep. And so this is kind of the frame that we bring to all the work that we do. We'll talk about kind of these 3 patterns where CEOs really tend to get stuck on this path to scale. And then we're going to talk about, so what? You're all here because you want to learn something and you want to avoid some of these pitfalls. You want to see around some of these corners, and you want to scale kind of with the most grace that you can. And so we'll talk about that too. So what? What can you do now? Then we'll kind of go into Q&A. We'll have some time for that, and then we'll be closing our time together. Great. Let's go ahead and move along. So starting with confusion. At Talentism, our definition of confusion is pretty simple. It's not a negative word. It's simply those moments where expectations don't meet reality, right? And they happen all the time. They're actually kind of a feature of being a human in reality. And what tends to happen is that we'll have an unconscious reaction to this unexpected experience. So to make that concrete, at the simplest level, imagine you're walking down the street on an even sidewalk and you trip over something, right? That was an unexpected experience. You thought you were gonna just make it down the street and it was always gonna be good. And all of a sudden you're tripping and falling on your face. You're gonna have a lot of reactions to that internally. Feelings, shame, anger, whatever place you tend to go to. And the mind's gonna try to make up a story about what happened without necessarily even looking back to try to understand the data. Did someone trip me? This damn city won't fix the sidewalks. I need new shoes. Something's gonna come up. It's kind of an unconscious reaction to that thing. So that experience is happening all the time. And it's a positive feature of reality because it's how we learn, right? We have mental models, and confusion allows us to come back and be like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. I might need to update my mental model here about what that means, about what the sidewalk is like, so next time I don't trip over it. In a work context, this happens all the time too. Someone doesn't deliver on a deadline that they had committed to. Someone takes longer to answer an email than you expected. Someone's language is curt or flowery or just something that you don't expect, and you make up stories about that. Someone's tone of voice is a certain way in a meeting, and you decide that means a certain thing. There's moments all day long when these expectations of how things should have gone, and these expectations are often unconscious, and like we always know what we're expecting, don't match what happens in reality, and so we go into a moment of confusion. The positive, and the thing about these moments and why we've built a lot of our practice around this is that those are the moments where we can learn, right? Those moments of confusion are really the moments we can be like, okay, it's time to update my model of reality. What really happened here? Let me explore that. It's also the moments where some people will just kind of harden and solidify and make brittle their models of reality. No, I'm sure that John is a terrible employee. And it can go that way too. So that's confusion. So, you probably come in here with a sense of what it takes to scale. There's a pretty convincing standard narrative out there about what it takes to scale a company, right? Like you have a great idea, an insight about the market. You go out there and you start to test your assumptions, you market or a service, you get to product market fit, you get to a strategy about how you're gonna tackle this opportunity, how a go-to-market strategy, then you're gonna build a team around this, you're gonna raise funds, and you're gonna execute, and you're gonna scale that company. And that's all well and good. And one of the things we like to do with Talentism is kind of turn models on their head and ask, well, what about the people that are doing these things, right? And looking at it from that perspective of the people, we asked, well, what if these things are actually outcomes? They're like getting the A on the test. They're outcomes of the right kinds of behaviors, the right kinds of attention internally to the company. What would it look like to design a model around leading indicators if in fact these are actually the lagging indicators of a company scaling well? And so doing that kind of took us to this model of like, okay, well, it's about where a CEO, where their executive team, where managers, where they place their attention. And that attention goes through kind of 4 phases. People at the organization, in particular the CEO, goes through these 4 phases of first, they place their attention on doing, right? You're a startup founder, and if anything's going to get done, it's going to be you doing it. Especially as a solo founder, you're kind of doing everything. And there's a pretty clear cap on how much the company will grow if growth is just dependent on your throughput and your output. So that's kind of this do stage. Actually, I have slides for this, so let me go ahead and say that's the do stage. You do the work that accomplishes the goals. The time orientation in this kind of phase is, it's today, it's now, it's soon. This isn't literal, it's just kind of conceptually, you're really looking at the now of the organization. And what really limits your growth is that upper bound is just your time or your energy, just how much are you able to do, right? Then this next stage of the model is the decide stage, and have clients that love the stage. They love kind of having the visualization in their mind of what they need to do in order to achieve the mission of the organization, and then telling people, kind of handing out, okay, I decide what you're going to do. I decide what you're going to do. In this stage, as a CEO, you're deciding who does what. You delegate, basically. The orientation might be the sprint that you're in, the tomorrows, the week, really kind of focused on the goal accomplishment in the short term. Again, this is just a generalization. It's not actually literal. That's the time orientation. And the limit to growth in this case is your attention, right? As you have more and more direct reports and you're telling more and more people what to do, you're going to start dropping balls. You're not going to clarify well. Something's going to be happening in that side of the org, that department in sales, that you just don't have the time to give attention to, and it'll go in a way that you don't want. And the way it often sounds with clients is like, why don't they just know what to do? They should just be doing this thing. They should just be doing this thing, right? And that's a clue for me often to dig into, like, how is management working right now with you in this organization? From the side stage, we move to this design stage of leadership, of being a CEO. And in this stage, you design the organization, you design the roles, you design the structures, you design the processes that accomplish the goals. You've kind of taken a step back actually from the day-to-day. And so your time orientation is months ahead or a quarter or more ahead. Not always, not necessarily, but this is kind of the orientation that this design lives in, right? Because if you put a certain role in place and you hire for it, you're really looking for the results months down the line to see if that experiment worked. This transition from decide to design is one of the bigger leaps that CEOs have to make. And this is one we actually do often see CEOs being replaced around, because this design stage is an act of imagination, and one that is not one that everyone has a talent around. And so you do need to bring in help if you don't have that talent, and it's possible to grow on through this, even if this is a blind spot that you have. The analogy for me on this stage is often kind of thinking of yourself as a coach. You're no longer playing the game. You're not on the field scoring the goals and playing defense, but you're choosing who gets to play those roles. You're helping them define the roles and what they should do in each one of those positions. And you're helping them to coordinate between each other the strategy of how you're going to win the game. You're coming back after games and debriefing and kind of helping the team learn. You're putting in the structures, the practices, the things that will help that team ultimately succeed in their goal. And then the last stage here is the decode stage. The decode stage is where you decode, you bring in the insight of where the market is going, what is going to happen in the future. The time orientation here is the future that you can capitalize on. And there's really no limit to growth kind of at this stage. You're really kind of looking forward, for this stage, a good example, despite what you might think of it, Jeff Bezos is someone who has been amazing at this stage. Back in 1995, he had this market insight that so much of the commercial activity of the world would move online, and he started to capitalize on it with this vision of, okay, this is where the world is going, and there's an opportunity, and I'm just going to start selling some books online. Elon Musk too is someone who thinks in terms of decades or even longer, centuries, and is thinking like, if this is where the world is going, how do we build and capitalize around that now? So they're really bets that you're placing around the future and helping your organization make sense of that potential future and how to build towards and capitalize on it. Okay. So you'll notice there's kind of 4 stages. That means there's 3 real shifts that need to happen, as you're growing through these phases. And those 3 real shifts are first from do to decide. And this is the context shift that we call a context shift from I do to you need to do, right? This is the context shift from rolling up your sleeves to kind of being the commander in the trenches and helping people understand what the work is. And again, there's a time orientation of tomorrow. And in this context shift, you want to be sure that you're building in, you're backfilling at every level, but definitely this level, people who can do the work, right? You can't really move into a place that you're telling people this is what you need to do until you trust that this is what you'll need to do. And so the confusion that we'll often see at this place is a CEO will kind of like just be overwhelmed. There's too much to do, and a client like this will then kind of start to go out and hire people or recruit people or, bring on co-founders and give away equity. And they're like, okay, good, they're on board. I'm going to go do that thing now. And they come back a few weeks later and they're like, what happened? That thing didn't happen. And it's because they haven't yet made that shift to the real work of the decide layer is creating clarity for others about what it is that needs to happen. And so that's one way that this context shift breaks. From decide to design, the context shift sounds like you need to do to this is how it works. So you're now moving directly from delegation to this is how it works. This is how the machine works. This is how the process works. This is how your role works. This is what good looks like. And, in this context shift, again, it's one of the bigger ones and the one that we see many, all context shifts are places where we can get stuck. And in general, this is one of the bigger ones where we see a lot of CEOs get stuck. They can make it into the decider place pretty well, design around that. And then, at this place, you're no longer necessarily delegating the work. You're letting someone else own a goal, right? And so your head of sales may own the commercial goal for your org. And, what this looks like when there's confusion around it is the CEO is like, yeah, that's your goal. And then they get nervous that it's not going to get delivered on or that something's wrong. And the thing is, as the CEO, you've been doing this for so long, you have a great visualization in your head about how you might get to the goal, right? You really get it. And you have probably just a lot more developed intuition and insight about the market. And so chances are good that your visualization, your plan about how to achieve the commercial goal in the organization is good. And what you might do then is jump right in and kind of undermine that person's ownership and authority of that goal and begin to tell their direct reports what to do or do some of the work yourself or say this is how it should be. And so you're kind of taking back that goal in a way and confusing people about the real ownership about how things should work. You're coming back down to like, this is what you need to do. Right? And so that's the decide to design context shift. And then the third and final context shift from design to decode is moving from this is how it works to this is how we win. Right? And clarifying for people over and over again, given the market conditions, given where it looks like things are going, given the context and the information that I'm synthesizing about the world right now, this is how we win. And helping align probably at that point a much larger organization in a direction so most people are pulling in the same direction. And actually you've handed off the design capacity at this point to your lieutenants. They're responsible for thinking about the roles and the machines largely that are going to help to drive the organization in this direction. So that's a little bit about the shifts. And I started to hint a bit here as to how they break. Right? What are the confusions that you as a CEO, you as a leader are likely to face as you go through these context shifts? And I want to take a moment here and just pause and ask, as you listen to that, what really resonated with you? Which ones were you like, oh yeah, that's me, I'm good at that, or oh, I get that, I've done that before, I do that well? Are there any that surprised you? You're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Or which might point at a blind spot. Or are there some that you're like, ugh, I don't want to tell people what to do, or this act of imagination, it's too frou-frou for me. Let's get the thing done, right? Or just like, God, I wish I could live into code. Like this, start to kind of notice where you are at on this map, because that's good information for you as to what might be needed for this these shifts to happen at your org, and that you have to go through every level in order to scale. So there's no skipping levels here. So next I want to talk about a few of the patterns that we see of how this breaks down over and over again, and having worked with hundreds of executives across the world, where we really see kind of pictures that that maybe you'll be able to relate to. We've identified about 8. I think I'll have time to go into 3 of them. And if you want to hear about others, feel free to reach out. We can talk through them at another conversation. And the first one we kind of name and the founder's dilemma. And there's a lot, I want to caveat here, lots of different ways that people define the founder's dilemma. This is our definition of talentism, of the founder's dilemma. And, you know, I bet for some of you founders out there, I can kind of read your mind as you were listening to this. You're like, oh man, doing the code. I really love doing the code. I love getting shit done. And like, yeah, I have an insight. I know where this thing is going, and I can just see the opportunity to capitalize on. But I don't really want to be telling people what to do. And that design thing, I'm not so sure about it. Yeah, I don't even know if we really need that, or something along those lines. This is what we call the founder's dilemma. And it's, you know, as a founder, you just are so gung-ho, you love rolling up your sleeves, and you have vision, right? You see where the world is going. And so you want to jump in. You know, you see the future, you're great at the code, you're great at doing, and you don't want to be telling people what to do. And you might not even see a need for design, or you might just, you know, think like, oh, that'll be easy. We'll just hire people. And what happens is there's a confusion about those 2 levels, that they're kind of not necessary, you know, and this can actually go pretty far into the growth of an organization. If you have hit on a great market insight or a great product opportunity, you can grow a lot without putting in a good decide layer and a good design layer. And so we have clients that tell us this model's not true. Like, look at us, we've grown all this, like we've grown so much, and, you know, I haven't had to do these things. And you know, what I'll say to a client kind of in that place is, you haven't had to deal with these things yet. And what this is a relatively fragile system. And the way this fails is kind of systematic, like large scale failure. This isn't something that peters out when you don't have these levels in place. It's something that explodes, which is kind of a different failure mode, say, than like, you know, underperformance or bad management or so on. And so that's what happens kind of if someone doesn't clarify this confusion for themselves. And what they're doing to their teams is they're confusing everybody by jumping in from doing the work to like pointing the way and not clarifying for others what really needs to be done. I remember early in my career, I worked with a founder just like this. And, you know, he brought me in just like a matter of minutes with his vision. I like moved across the country. I was like, this guy really sees something that the world needs. I'm so excited to work on it. And he worked so hard. Like, he was the hardest working person at the company, and he'd stay up, you know, in the evenings, like later than everyone else. You know, we had this shared office, always last one to leave, and his throughput was amazing. So he loved doing, and he really had a strong vision, which really brought people on board. And I can remember 2 times in multiple years that he clarified for me what I needed to do. That he was like, hey, this is your goal. And it was usually around a small thing. It was kind of a delegate. It wasn't even like a big picture thing. It's like, can you build this part of the website kind of thing? You know, and there was not a lot of attention kind of on the design level either. Like, well, what should this org look like to accomplish this big vision that I have? And, you know, at the time, it just made me angry, and I left. And now I see more of like what was really there. So I want to jump into the next one. Another way that we often see, you know, pattern of confusion show up is people don't build a management layer, right? And they leave a gap there. And this is, again, kind of a big vision CEO, maybe not so much someone who rolls up their sleeves, but someone who's really excited about the growth, sees the goal and wants to hard charge, drive at it. They might go out and raise lots of money, and just doesn't kind of bother filling in the levels behind them too well. So this is kind of what we call the management gap. CEO doesn't backfill behind them, focuses on moving up, and what ends up happening is they keep getting sucked down, and their confusion of like, why do I keep getting sucked down? People keep asking me for things. They're taking me to sales meetings. Why are they, you know, why do I have to jump back in and like do this marketing plan myself? Is they blame their direct reports. They blame the people that they're ostensibly delegating to, and they end up having high turnover, right? And this CEO, again, visionary, interesting to work with. Actually, I had a call today with a client. He's a tech founder, and he just lost a key employee, just quit on him. And the thing that we've really identified is one of his talents is optimism, like seeing where the world is going and really moving forward and working well on moving forward. And this optimism also kind of means he sees the best in everybody and kind of keeps people too long. And he's not clarifying, for them what he needs from them, by when, what roles they're filling, what goals they actually own. And whenever conflict comes up, he's like, yeah, but they'll get it. And kind of there's a lot of talking that happens. And at the end of that, the management hasn't happened, and the role design for that person hasn't happened. And he's still trying to like drive towards the future and see this opportunity in the market and technology, that's moving so quickly, and it's definitely there. But he can't seem to make progress towards it because he keeps getting sucked down. Now he's going to have to go and hire this person again and hopefully manage him better. And so the way we work with clients in those moments is really around developing awareness about this pattern and then designing around what they're like, so that they can address that really well and not fall into that again, because they're not going to change that much themselves, but you can really design around what you're like. Anything else about the management gap? No, just this double clicking on this. The way that you move through the levels is you fill in, you backfill behind you. You build that layer to the degree that you're able to trust it, so you can kind of move into the next layer of really focusing on design or for the organization. And the last kind of pattern that I want to talk about that we see a lot is one that we call stuck at the cider. And basically at this level, that the CEO probably is good at management. This is someone who again has a great visualization for how you're going to accomplish the mission, has a plan and knows how to do it, and then also someone that just really loves developing their people. This is a CEO who loves investing in their people and kind of checking in with them and growing them and clarifying goals for them. They're probably not someone who's particularly conflict averse. They like saying things like how it is, and so they'll kind of enjoy that part, right? And so the stuck at the cider, it's over here. The stuck at the cider pattern looks like CEO enjoys and is probably relatively good at exercising authority. Maybe not. Actually, you can be stuck at the cider and not be good at it, but at least enjoys it, and doesn't really either has a blind spot or doesn't care about or isn't really interested in moving into design. They keep taking on a larger and larger span of control, right? They're hiring and they're responsible for more and more people, and they kind of run out of time to manage well. They run out of time to clarify what good looks like and what has to happen and what the goals are and how we're going to track against those goals. To be clear, it doesn't mean that the organizational chart looks like CEO and 70 direct reports. Really often, it'll look like kind of a normal structure. They'll have a few lieutenants and then they'll have direct reports of those and so on and so forth. But they still kind of want to decide everyone's goals. I had a client a few months ago who was kind of in this phase. Is definitely something he was facing. And, his org had, I think it was about 40 full-time people, 100 part-time people in it. And he came to the table and he's like, here's my plan. And he had literally decided goals for every person in every role of the organization and what they should be doing and what they should be accomplishing. And kind of the red flag there is, if you're telling your lieutenants, direct reports what to do, your lieutenants aren't responsible for those direct reports. Right. And the thing is, again, the positive spin of this, the thing that the confusion is, he does have a really good visualization for how you might accomplish the goal. It's not the only one, but it's one that could work. And so he kind of wanted this control thing of telling everyone what to do. And the way we really worked on that was clarifying, okay, if you're handing off a goal to a lieutenant, they own that goal. Like you don't get to tell them what their direct reports are going to do. You can discuss that with them. You can have input. You can have influence. You're wanting that lieutenant to do the best job they can around that department, and at the end of the day, if they're not, it's just that they're not the right, they might not have the right talent for that role. It's not that you then have to go in there and tell their direct reports what to do. The way this confusion often sounds from a CEO, from an executive, is, yeah, people are just doing the wrong thing. They're just, and it's because there hasn't been time to clarify, but like, they should know what to do. I told them 2 months ago, this is where we're headed. Like, they should know what to do, is often what that one will sound like. So that's kind of the stuck at the cider pattern. And there's others, but we kind of wanted to throw these out there. And I want to transition now and talk about, imagine you're sitting there and being like, okay, so what? Right? Like, great, there's this model, there's these stages, maybe I buy in, maybe I don't, but what do I do about it as I scale my company? How do I not run into these pitfalls? How do I continue to scale and do so gracefully? What does this actually mean for you? And the first thing I'll say is that the first and very clear part of this model is you have to backfill each stage, right? And you have to backfill each stage to the degree that you trust it, and that trust might require some translation. What does that mean? That means that there are leaders out there who have really strong organizations, and they don't trust them, even though it's pretty likely those organizations could accomplish the goals that their those lieutenants could accomplish the goals they're responsible for. And so that is something that may be a blind spot, or something that you need help around, that you dig into with someone, or that you have a translation layer to help you kind of really trust that the layer down has got it. But basically, yeah, the way you move through is you make sure you backfill the doers, and then you backfill the management layer, and you have a layer of managers who really you can trust to help the doers get the work done. And then once you have trust in kind of that management layer, you're starting to design, you're starting to bring in lieutenants that kind of own parts of the org and are going to be doing all of the management of that themselves. And you're really kind of responsible for design at that stage of how things will work, and so on, kind of backfilling as you move up. The next so what is, I've said this a couple of times, no one is going to be, you are not going to be equally good at every one of these stages and the responsibilities required at each one. And so developing some sense and some honesty and some acceptance of where you are strong and where you're either not strong or you just don't like it, because that's really important. If you don't like something, you're not going to do that well at it. Or where you might even have a total blind spot. I didn't realize I was going to have to do that. Is the next kind of big thing you want to work on to not have this jump up and bite you. You want to understand kind of which stages and get data around which ones you'll really be able to do well at, and where to really you're going to need to step back or design around what you're like. So kind of developing that self-awareness is a big part of how you keep this from capping the growth of your organization. Related to that, with that knowledge, you can go out and design around what you're like, right? The thing that CEOs often believe that is not true is that they have to do all the things. You have to do the things at each layer, and you have to ensure that those things get done, but it doesn't have to be you doing them. Right? And so you might design this pathway around what you're like. Maybe you really do hate management and you're not going to be good at it. And so one way we've often designed with clients around that is you bring in a really strong lieutenant who's responsible for the management layer of your organization, right? A COO, someone who you can trust that translates you well, because you're out there like talking about the big picture and getting things done, and they have to turn that into, okay, what are the goals that help accomplish that big picture vision, and how do we really distribute those to the organization? But that's one way you might design around a blind spot or a distaste for the management, for the decide layer. So ultimately, you don't have to do, you as leader, as executive, as a CEO, don't have to do everything, but you do have to ensure all these stages get backfilled so the company doesn't get limited in its growth. You do have to go through all of them. And so this is the work of design. So it's kind of meta here. This is kind of a work that you would do in the design layer, which is how do you bring in roles and people that can help you around each one of these stages when you need them. And then the last one, also related to this, is to go out and enlist help, right? We have blind spots that we can't see, but other people can see them. And so working with advisors, with coaches, with your executive team, having honest conversations so that you can get more and more clear about what you're like and design around that. is just a fantastic way to not get super stuck. Right? We talk about at Talentism how clarity is one of the highest values vectors in today's complex commercial world, because it's seeing things well that allows us to design well for them. Great. So before we close, I kind of want to just take a moment here. We have about, let's say, 15 minutes for a Q&A. And so, put yourself back in this model again. Where is it that you really are resonating with this, or seeing something that you didn't see before that you'd like to ask a question around? And we're going to move into about a 15-minute Q&A, and Sharon's going to be helping me. She'll be unmute and help me. She's been looking through the questions and kind of will synthesize what the best ones are to really dig into. And for this time, we can also come back to the faces. Okay.
Hey, everybody. So I just want to invite you, there's no open questions right now, but if you have a question for Cesar, go ahead and type them in and we'll address them as they come in. We need that music back at this point, Cesar. If there are questions that come up after this, there'll be other opportunities, ways you can engage. So let's see. So the question is, Cesar, as an investor, how do you communicate the need for change to employees?
I'm kind of confused by this question. I imagine if you're an investor, you kind of have a picture of what the organization looks like. And, are we talking about change of the leadership? Are we talking about change of the design? I think as an investor, honestly, probably your leverage is to work with the executive team. Here we go, meaning broader. Okay, what I'm going to read into this question is, you're an investor in an organization and the leadership, the CEO maybe is no longer working. Maybe they have a blind spot around one of these layers and you're really seeing that they need to be replaced. And so you don't want to lose the trust or kind of the employee base or the value of them. And so kind of how do you align with the employee base around this? If and when you do replace the CEO, I'd say, I imagine this maybe, if that is the case, that where you are likely to gain is initially with the executive team, because the clarity really, we often say that two confused people can't bring each other to clarity, and so if you have this clarity, are there other people on the exec team that you can help get to this clarity, so you can enlist help? If it becomes an us versus them, everyone's going to jump into that confusion loop, into that story, and turn it into fighting. Okay, it seems like there's more on this question here.
So there's a separate question I'm going to call out. Are there proxy roles at larger companies that can help founders develop skills at each stage for growth? For example, between founding experiences?
Also not following that question again. Are we talking about like between instances of starting companies?
That's how I'm translating that, Cesar.
Okay. Yeah, I think, at the most basic level of clarity, there's a need to create awareness, right? And this is kind of what this webinar was intended to do, is like, hey, there's actually a stage transition here, and are you in sync with me that these are stages that need to happen? And if that's the case, where do you see yourself, right? One of the blind spots we called out that I didn't talk about a lot about today is level blind spot, where a CEO believes they're good at all of the stages, and starting to gather data around where they might need help. And in that, designing kind of proxy roles, designing roles that will help that CEO and his next venture, say, really move forward.
Okay, next question I have here says, as company scales, how do you manage expectations of employees who believe they will move into a lieutenant role, but have not demonstrated that trust yet? what if the timing for their personal growth is not in line with the company's growth?
It's a good question. So what I'm kind of translating that question is, as an organization grows, you kind of put people in roles, and some of those roles are going to evolve. I mean, and there can often be a lack of sync about what an employee believes their career trajectory is and what their manager believes that career trajectory is. And in talentism's kind of conceptualization, that's the role of the manager, is to clarify for the employee kind of where they are, where they're performing against expectations, kind of where their evolution is, what the next phase of their potential growth within the organization might be. And so that's kind of this management responsibility, that you want someone who has demonstrated management talent to really be taking on a question like that.
Okay, next question is from Emily. How can you help founders get comfortable with bridging into management and helping them get to the delegation phase?
Yeah, helping founders get comfortable with delegation, with bridging into management. I think when I'm working with a client who is in that phase, who's exploring their management responsibilities, the way we tend to work on it, the way I frame it, is as an experiment to understand if there's actually talent there, because this is something about our orientation to coaching and talentism, is that we're here to unleash potential. And so as much as possible, we don't want clients kind of building a ton of skills at things that they're never going to develop mastery at. That's kind of a low investment. It's often necessary, especially as a CEO. You're going to have to manage as a founder, as a CEO. You're going to have to manage. But if it's not the place where you're going to develop true mastery, then it's best that you don't take on a lot of that responsibility. And so the first thing I'll often do with a client kind of bridging into that is explore, hey, you may or may not be good at this. I am convinced that there is deep talent in every person. And what I'm here to do is to help you develop that. If it's in management, then let's explore that. Let's start running experiments, and then kind of digging into the data, right? Like, how would you frame the responsibilities of this person? What do they have to get done? How have you clarified those goals with them? There's a piece of this that is also teaching. What is good management? How do you actually get goals accomplished through the work of other people? How do you clarify those goals? How do you create a loop structure, a feedback structure that allows them to see where they are in relationship to achieving those goals, and then tracking against them and making progress and starting to really see that piece. So do they have the talent? Do they develop quickly in the ability to do those things, to clarify goals, to help people accomplish them, to help them notice their own strengths and talents and so on?
Next question. Sometimes it feels like we're working in multiple stages at the same time. How do you recognize and drop the appropriate tasks so we can focus on being in the right stage, in the correct stage?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question. I love this question. I think I didn't clarify during the process that like most models that have like discrete things, you're often kind of in all places at once, right? Or can be in many places at once. And so, you might find yourself doing some of the work in your organization, maybe strategy, maybe fundraising, maybe, you'll find yourself doing some of the management. You'll find yourself doing some of the role design and the structure design. You'll find yourself doing some of the decoding of the future. And I think even in the question that the answer is called out a bit, which is like, are you paying close enough attention to where you start to pull some of your energy and trust that that's going to happen, right? So at the doer stage, is there a good enough system in place that you are going to start to develop the trust that people can do things without you, kind of like leveling back in, rolling up your sleeves and confusing the crap out of everybody, right? And so there's a developing of trust, and often it's going to feel uncomfortable, scary, or fearful to let go of some of those things, and trust that person that's doing the work has it. But that's one way kind of internally you may be checking. Another way you may be checking is with your, with your team, with other executives, like, hey, do you think we can stop kind of doing this part and really hand it off to that unit of the organization. On the management layer too, it's kind of a question back to you, like, what is it going to take? Because this is the important question. So what's it going to take for you to trust that a manager on your team is going to be able to accomplish a bigger goal with their direct reports, without you having to like dive in and support them, and then clarifying that for them. Hey, in order for me to trust you owning this fully, here's what I'd have to see, because you're managing a manager at that point.
Next question from Daniel. Getting past the design stage as a CEO requires backfilling with management who are capable of acting as their own designers. You mentioned this is often when the new CEO needs to be brought in if they can't design well. Is it not the case that the blocker is often the lieutenants who are unable to level up to design level thinking?
I'm reading the question too, just kind of to get it in my head. Yeah, so good question. Yes, it may be that as you've built out a management layer, and your lieutenants kind of at the stage where as a CEO you're kind of living in design. Your next level down is the management layer, right? And so you've filled in that layer with good managers in kind of in your judgment, and you're ready kind of to like spend more and more of your time in the code, and so you're trying to fill in the design layer, right? And you have the sense, and what you're saying right now, or what I interpret in this question is those the people that I see as my direct reports right now, I have a judgment that they may not be able to level up into this design responsibility. If we were having a longer conversation, I'd say, okay, let's go explore that. Right? Can you run an experiment with a direct report to see who, if anybody in your organization has that talent? Do you have that talent? Right? Because you definitely need to fill in that layer. Maybe you'll have to do it with people from outside the org, but maybe not. What you want to trust is that you're putting people in that layer who are likely to have this conceptual design talent. And it may be the case that your managers at this point do not. And it's going to be a tough conversation to clarify with them at some point if you find that they don't. But if you're clarifying along the way, hey, this is the next stage that I see for the organization, this is the role I would see you moving into, and in general, I find that there's some title confusion here because you've named someone COO, and actually they're not there to do the COO work of design, and so you might have to demote their title. But it's those tough conversations you're having. Like, to really be COO for the next stage of our org means you'll have to be able to deliver on these responsibilities around design. That looks like this. Let's run that experiment, to see if that's something that you are going to enjoy, that you're going to be good at. And if not, like, there is a management piece of like defining what their growth trajectory looks like at the org otherwise.
Okay, I think we have time for one, possibly two more questions, Cesar. So the next question comes from Heather. You mentioned that systematic thinking ability could be a CEO's blind spot. Presumably, one needs to be a fourth order of consciousness level thinking to successfully manage a company at scale, since they can see how everything interconnects, essentially turning confusion into clarity. How do forms of mind and level of adult development affect this?
I love the framing of this as an adult development question, because it's something I love to geek out on. But I'm actually just going to take it at a much simpler level, which is, actually, no matter what your level of adult development, people tend to have more or less kind of conceptual talent, conceptual strength, right? There's people who just love talking about ideas, and Jeff calls these people the hand-waving people, and he calls himself one of these people, and they kind of don't come back into the concrete. And there's people that like really live at the concrete level, kind of no matter how much evolution they might have had in their self. And so, the thing here is, if you find that you don't have talent at that level, there is this self-acceptance piece, which is hard. and this humility of filling in that role with someone who does and who translates well for you. Like, a lot of founders are actually very concrete thinkers, and so when they get to that stage, they do need help, and it takes a certain kind of humility to do that, to be like, okay, I just need someone who's a better conceptual thinker than me, and who can then translate that into my concrete ways of thinking, that I can trust. Because the part that you probably do have as a founder is still some of this decode, this ability to bring in insight from the market that you can really develop your talent and your mastery around. And I want to give people a couple of minutes at the end to probably go on breaks if they have back-to-back calls. So let's call that the last question, and just go into closing here. I have one more slide, I believe. Okay. Yes, just some quick reflection questions. Where do you see yourself in this again, kind of having talked about it, and where would be good for you to really explore more deeply and have kind of a conversation? Are you already seeing kind of a layer that you might start to design to fill in the future, right? If you're like, oh crap, I just never want to do that much management, then that's a design task that you're putting on yourself, of like really building a management layer that you're not gonna have to do yourself. And where do you want to take this from here? Coming out of this presentation, this webinar, is there some action that you want to take? Is there a next conversation that you want to have, or someone that you want to share this with once we send you all the video? I would like to close just by saying thank you to all of you. It's just a pleasure to share some of this stuff with you. I can geek out on models and frameworks all day long. And so if you want to explore further, please send me an email at cesar@talentism.com. And I'd be happy to dig into something here. In particular, if you think you might want to explore getting help from a coach, from enlisting help from a coach or a consulting group like us. If you want to explore further on your own, I recommend the interview with our CEO, Jeff, on Farnham Street. You can find all this stuff on our website if you go to talentism.com. Our podcast, which is great, it's called Coaching in the Clear. We have a lot of content on our YouTube channel, and we have a great newsletter called The Sense Maker that goes out, which has a lot of content like this here. So thank you. Wish I could see all your faces, but it's been a pleasure sharing this with you all, and I wish you a really good day.